Once upon a time, I was walking through the bookstore that's about 5 minutes from my house. There I saw two mages going full-on magical battle in front of me. When I woke up, startled from the dream, I realized it's time we talk some urban fantasy. Hey everybody, welcome back to BellTube. I'm Brian Bell. Let's get right into it. Today I want to talk about urban fantasy. The first thing that I think makes sense to do is to define what I'm calling urban fantasy, because it might be a little bit different for everybody. Typically, urban fantasy is defined as something that's happening in a city or something that we can relate to. But I'm going to go a little different here and call urban fantasy something that happens within the world that we are currently living in. For example, one of the series that we're going to talk about today primarily happens in Chicago, Illinois. That's a real city. We call that urban fantasy. On the other hand, something like the Greenbone Saga happens in a technological, modern setting, but I wouldn't call it urban fantasy because it happens in a fictional land. So that being said, let's move on with those definitions. Urban fantasy means it's happening here in our Earth. Modern fantasy means it's happening something technologically looking like where we're from, but not really there. Think of it almost like Spider-Man happens in New York City. Superman, on the other hand, happens in Metropolis, or Batman happens in Gotham. Today we're going to talk about 5 urban fantasy series that I'm going to recommend for you. Some of them you've probably read, some of them you may not have. It really depends how much urban fantasy you've gotten yourself into. I will say something like Neil Gaiman's American Gods stands for me as a great standalone urban fantasy. Why? Because it happens in basically the Midwest of the United States. They travel around a little bit, but these are real locations with fantastical and magical things happening. One of the things that really draws me into urban fantasy is that unlike epic fantasy, where it seems like we're journeying to lands so far beyond and it's really kind of an escape into a magical landscape, there's a piece of us, I think, as fantasy readers and as science fiction readers that craves the what if? What if something could really happen here? What if there was something kind of magical in our own world, in our own universe, in the very city that we live in?
Thank you! Welcome to my world of magic, a world of wonder and enchantment.
And I think that kind of longing really creates the right mind space for urban fantasy, because we're not traveling off to some faraway land. We're not going to Middle Earth. We might be going to New York. We might be going to Hollywood, California. These seem a little bit more real to us, so there's a little bit more of an appeal, and it kind of brings out that what if scenario in our minds that I know for me is really appealing. So today we're going to talk about 5 urban fantasy series that I think are great starting points. And I think the way to really describe this is almost like we're going to go from our hero to an anti-hero and the sliding scale along the way. And if it helps at all for like a comic book reference, think about it this way if you happen to be a fan of comics. Okay, so the first series that I want to talk about is absolutely on the hero side of a main character protagonist, and that is the Iron Druid Chronicles by Kevin Hearne. Now, the premise of Iron Druid, it basically starts off in the American Southwest with our main character, Atticus O'Sullivan. He is a 2,000-year-old druid that has been on the run and hiding from an Irish god that he pissed off over 2,000 years ago. I think if memory serves, he stole his sword. Whatever the case, the whole pantheon of Irish gods is basically out to get our main character Atticus, and along with his amazing animal companion Oberon, the Irish wolfhound, we really learn about what it's like to be a druid in America. And he travels the globe throughout the series. The series is a 9-book completed series, so if you're looking for something that's already finished, Iron Druid Chronicles is a great place to go. I mean, even Atticus's lawyer, right? So we know we're in America when you have to have a lawyer in the story, right? His lawyer is a vampire, okay? And it's a great character too. And the cast that Atticus builds up throughout the series remains relatively small, so it feels kind of like an intimate urban fantasy story where we have a very clear protagonist who's definitely on the heroic good guy type of mentality, and we watch his interactions with the Irish pantheon of gods, other gods that come through. It really opens up in scope like some of these other series that we'll get to. But the first series that I would really encourage you for, if you are looking for a heroic main character, would be the Iron Druid Chronicles by Kevin Hearne. Moving down our sliding scale a little bit, we're going to get to one that is probably the most popular and well-known urban fantasy on this list, and that is the Dresden Files. I love the Dresden Files. There are 17 books out. You've probably heard it before. It starts off a little narrow in scope, where the first 3 entries in the series are sort of like Monster of the Week or Mystery of the Week, where our main character protagonist, Harry Dresden, is a wizard for hire in Chicago. One of the neat things about the Dresden Files is that we're told right away that Harry has interactions with modern electronics that tend to make those electronics go wonky. So not only are we in Chicago, which qualifies us as urban fantasy, he's getting these interactions with tech that really makes it feel like, hey, you know what? This guy had a smartphone that just went out of order because Harry walked in the room. Or this elevator stopped working because Harry walked in the room. Jim Butcher, the author, has done an outstanding job of building what started to be a pretty narrow cast in an urban setting in Chicago into a much more sprawling epic adventure as we get through the series. Currently, the series has 17 books published. I think there's also some short stories as well. The cast does get bigger, and to be honest with you, this is an urban fantasy, but it sort of shifts into epic fantasy as these books go on. So if you happen to be a fan of epic fantasy, there's something really great in store for you as the series progresses, but I never really felt in any time that the Dresden Files has left its roots in urban fantasy. Harry Dresden, an absolute fantastic main character. You know, Jim Butcher takes a lot of heat online from some booktube channels that call him a misogynist, or his character, Harry Dresden, is too focused on women's anatomy in books. I don't know, you guys. I don't buy it. I'm not that sensitive. I've been to an R-rated movie before. It's just not that big a deal. Honestly, if that's something that's going to turn you off to the Dresden books, skip it. You probably just want to end this video with the Iron Druid series. And if an author who sort of is highlighting over and over again in the early books some of the female anatomy types of things, if that's going to really get under your skin, then the main characters in my list coming up are probably not for you. But that being said, if you can agree with me that what Harry Dresden does or thinks is pretty PG-13, we can move on. Okay, moving on to the third series that I want to talk about is a main character that I feel kind of rides the neutral line. So if we think about alignment, almost in terms of like Dungeons and Dragons, where you have good and you have evil, I think Alex Verus falls squarely right in the middle. He's pretty neutral. He'll do selfish things that benefit him, but more than not, he'll do things that benefit other people. And I feel like for him, he's kind of a neutral character. The Alex Verus series is a 12-book completed series, and it's written by Benedict Jacka. The setting is London, England, but it does take us through various parts of the globe. The premise here is that Alex Verus is a mage, and his particular specialty is divination. And that means he can look to the future, see paths that may or may not happen, and try to take actions that lead him down the paths that end up with a good outcome. Now, That being said, there's other mages that specialize in throwing fireballs or ice shards. So being a diviner in this particular world isn't the most overpowered thing. In fact, he relies on a lot of gadgets. He's almost kind of like a Batman, so to speak, where yeah, he's a wizard, but he's using lots of tools and he's using lots of tech to basically get himself up to the power level of some of these more offensively minded wizards and mages that are out there. In this particular series, there's a group of light mages, there's a group of dark mages, but it's honestly quite blurry how those lines are drawn. Other than that, the light wizards have their own very specific organization, which is somewhat associated with the British government. And the dark mages generally work on their own. They team up from time to time when it suits them, but for the most part, they're off doing their own thing. Alex Verus, who we find out very early in book 1, was raised as a dark mage by his mentor, Richard Drock. Now, he becomes basically the big bad throughout the series. There's no spoiler there. And what we really find out is that Alex Verus goes through this most torturous training possible. And then he finally decides, you know what, being a dark mage really isn't for me. However, the light mages really don't want him either. So we find out in book 1, he's basically operating a magic shop in London. Tourists walk in there to buy what they consider to be magic tricks, but real mages walk in there and they know Alex Verus actually sells useful items for them. Alex Verus is just a really cool series. The Alex Verus universe is essentially pretty condensed into a few teammates of Alex's that we learn over the first several books. And the antagonists sometimes are friends, sometimes are enemies, but it definitely has a beginning, a middle, and an end to the series. So if you want to have a character that is kind of riding that line between good and evil, I think Alex Verus might be a great choice for you. Moving on to our 4th series, this one happens to be my favorite of the bunch that we're talking about today, and that is the Sandman Slim series by author Richard Kadrey. Here we have book 1 of the series, Sandman Slim. Here we have the finale, King Bullet, and this is just a tremendous, tremendous series. So here's the premise of Sandman Slim. I'm really excited about this one, you guys, because I've been preaching the Sandman Slim universe to anybody that will listen since I first found BookTube. As a matter of fact, I've been friendly with Richard Kadrey, the author, on X. He's just a super cool guy. But here's the premise of Sandman Slim. I'm going to just kind of give you the opening of book 1. It's not a spoiler in any way. Everything I'm about to share with you happens within probably page 1 or page 2 of the first book. So we have our main character, James Stark. He wakes up on page 1 in a refuse garbage pit on fire with scars all over him, particularly all over his face. He's completely scarred up. Why, you might ask? Why is he burning? Why is he so scarred up? Because he just escaped from hell. Well, why was he in hell? He didn't just die and was judged and deemed to go to hell. No, he's a magician in Hollywood, California. And him, along with a group of friends, were doing a magical ritual. And unbeknownst to James Stark, our main character, all of his friends betrayed him and sent him to hell during that ritual, where he found himself living for a number of years in a gladiatorial arena, fighting for his life with all kinds of crazy hellish weapons against all kinds of crazy monsters, basically working his way up through all of that to become the devil's himself's hitman in hell. On page 1, he escapes. He becomes the only person to escape, and what does he want to do? He wants to find the people that put him in hell in the first place and get his revenge. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is a tier 1 revenge story, and James Stark is an anti-hero. When we talk about the good, the middle, and the anti-hero level, James Stark is squarely in the anti-hero level. He's not quite as far gone as the guy that we're going to talk about next. But if you like anti-heroes, James Stark is amazing. One of James Stark's coolest magical abilities is that he can escape through shadows and transport himself through a shadow to any other shadow anywhere with a key to the Room of the 13 Doors. It's a really cool premise. I'm not spoiling anything, but suffice it to say, starting on page 2 of the first book in Sandman Slim, he's looking for the people that put him in hell. The story does get epic. We have appearances from angels. We have appearances from devils. We actually have the devil himself making appearances in this book, along with his opposite, if you know what I mean. There's just a lot going on here in Sandman Slim. He's snarky, he's funny, he's sarcastic, he suffers no stupidity. He just wants to figure out, all right, who put me in hell? Let's get my revenge on it. And how do I go back to my life that I had before? And is that even possible? I think the clear answer is no. And I really encourage you to pick up the Sandman Slim book. Read book 1. You'll know pretty quickly if it's for you or if it's not. I love Richard Kadrey's writing style. There's no chapters in the book. It just starts and finishes. I've never read a book like that where there's no chapters, but there are clear places where you'll go, okay, I can put the book down and, come back to it later. Sandman Slim to this day has remained my favorite urban fantasy series. So for sure, check out Sandman Slim. I kind of want to do a bigger deep dive into the Sandman Slim series. Let me know in the comments if that's something that you like. As a matter of fact, let me know in the comments if any of these urban fantasy series is intriguing enough for you to have me do a bigger deep dive into all of it rather than to quickly gloss over the gists of these series so you can pick out which one seems most exciting to you. The 5th series that we're talking about is one that I'm currently reading right now. It's the Eric Carter series by author Stephen Blackmoore. Now, Eric Carter, when we talk about hero, neutral, anti-hero, we are even further over on the anti-hero side. Eric Carter's from Los Angeles, and in the Eric Carter world, all of the magicians basically have what's called a knack, something that they're better at than everybody else. It's really their specialty. It's a little bit like the Alex Verus series in the world. Now, the cool part is that Eric Carter's knack is necromancy. And you can imagine all the craziness that's going to ensue when you have an anti-hero who, yeah, he's a good guy, kind of, but he's definitely got his own motivations, and revenge plays quite an active theme in the Eric Carter books. But he finds himself being taken advantage of by gods, and some of these gods, by the way, are like South American gods and Mexican gods and Aztec gods. And for the most part, I haven't seen this pantheon of gods really in any of the other urban fantasy settings. There's possibly some of it in American Gods. I'd have to look back at the book a little bit because I think Neil Gaiman pulled in a little bit of everybody in that. But Eric Carter, Stephen Blackmoore, this is good stuff, you guys. The premise here basically in book 1 is that Eric Carter has been gone from California for a time. He's been run out. He went to battle with a very, very bad wizard. He won, he killed him, and then he ran because everybody else was gunning for him. And he's coming back to Los Angeles because his sister's just been murdered, and he's trying to figure out the mystery of how that happened. Eric Carter is not for the faint of heart. I'm not even sure it would be an R rating. It might be NC-17. He does a ton of drugs. There's lots of graphic violence in it. It is not for the faint of heart. But if you like your anti-heroes to be no nonsense, by any means necessary, get the job done with the power of necromancy, Eric Carter might be something that you're interested in. One of the coolest parts about the Eric Carter series for me is that part of his necromancy knack is that it allows him to slip to what he calls the other side, and that's the land of the dead. And we see things from the land of the dead looking in on the land of the living, and it's a really cool premise. Now, I know in real life, the author Stephen Blackmoore happens to be good friends with Richard Kadrey, the author of Sandman Slim. And there are absolutely noticeable similarities between these two series. I feel like Eric Carter, in a way, is greatly influenced by what Richard Kadrey's done with Sandman Slim. They're both amazing. If you like anti-heroes and you like him pushing even boundaries that Sandman Slim doesn't push, then I think Eric Carter might be one for you to check out. So those 5 series to me are really interesting and different entry points for you in urban fantasy if you're new to the genre. If you're not new to the genre, and I suspect many of you are very familiar with the Dresden files, then maybe one of these other 4 series could creep into your TBR for 2024. I love them all. And for our one for the road today, I want to talk about how we can incorporate some of the magic of the books that we read into our own world in an urban style, right? So I've heard a lot of spiritual teachers talk about the importance of getting out into nature. And I would like to suggest and put forward a thought that maybe you can try on your own, that maybe if you're not feeling so amazing on any particular day, go take a walk outside. Notice some nature. Notice the wind on your face. Notice the sun in the sky. If it's raining and there's no sun, notice the rain. Feel the beauty and the imagination and the creativity of all that is nature, because it is surely magical. And I have found in my own life, when I get outside, even if it's just for a handful of minutes, my mind and my spirit clears up. I get a sense of stillness. I get a sense of calmness, and I'm ready for whatever the world throws at me. And if not entirely ready, at least a little bit more ready. That's one for the road today, and here's your fortune.